So in my last few videos, I've been diving into how the book of Acts lines up with historical records outside of the Bible. Today, we'll look at some cool historical tidbits in John's Gospel. The Gospel of John often gets the short end of the stick in scholarly discussions about the historical Jesus. It's like he's the redheaded stepchild of the bunch. Scholars are constantly questioning his reliability and historical accuracy at the drop of a hat. But let's be real here, the skepticism surrounding John is often based on some pretty flimsy grounds. Sure, his style and content might differ from the other Gospels, but that doesn't automatically make him the odd one out. So let's give John a fair shake. For starters, check out how John throws in a little geographical tidbit while he's writing the story. So picture this, you're leaving Cana up in the hills and heading down to the breezy shores of Capernaum. How do you get there? Well, according to John, you're literally going downhill. See, the Sea of Galilee is below sea level, so it's all downhill from Cana to Capernaum. And John's not shy about mentioning this descent either. He drops the phrase going down to Capernaum 3 times in his gospel, just as smooth as you please. Okay, so you know that story about Jesus healing a paralyzed man by the pool of Bethesda on the Sabbath? John's account of it is pretty spot on, and it serves as a lesson about not jumping to some far-fetched symbolic interpretations. He mentions the pool of Bethesda having 5 porticos. Back in the early 20th century, there was this French critic named Alfred Loisy who suggested that this detail was made up for some allegorical purposes. Loisy thought the 5 porticos symbolized the 5 books of Moses, and he didn't at all believe that a miracle happened. He was just thinking that it was a way to show that Jesus was surpassing the Old Testament law. Funny thing is, critics like Loisy probably felt pretty awkward when archaeologists dug up the pool and found exactly what John described. Turns out there were indeed 5 porticos, 4 surrounding the pool and 1 running across in the middle. So John wasn't pulling these details out of thin air, he simply mentioned it as a matter of fact. Let's keep the pool party going. The Pool of Siloam only gets a shout out from John in the Bible. It's in John 9, where Jesus tells that guy born blind to wash up after smearing mud in his eyes. Archaeologists have actually found the real deal, the Pool of Siloam, right there in Jerusalem as recent as 2004. Pretty cool, right? And get this, it's fed by the Gihon Spring, just like it says in 2 Kings 20. Plus, it's big enough and has the right vibes to have been used for ritual bathing, like for purification ceremonies. But there's a lot more going on here, so check this out from John 7. Right at the end of the Feast of Tabernacles we read, "Now on the last day, the great day of the feast, Jesus stood up and cried out, saying, 'If anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. He who believes in me, as the scripture said, from his innermost being will flow rivers of living water.' But this he spoke of the Spirit, whom those who believed in him were to receive, for the Spirit was not yet given, because Jesus was not yet glorified." So why does it seem like these verses are really honing in on the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles? Well, we learn from the Talmud that back during that feast, back in Jesus' time, there was this fancy water drawing ceremony happening, likely every day. They'd haul water from the Pool of Siloam and pour it over the altar in the temple. Plus, there was this light ceremony with candelabras and loud praise to Yahweh, especially linked to the water pouring on the 7th day of the feast. Now, we're not totally sure if the great day mentioned refers to the 7th or 8th day here, but folks at the feast would definitely have the water drawing ceremony on their minds. There's this saying in the Talmud about how epic the celebrations were, basically saying if you missed the water drawing shindig, you basically missed out on half your life. But let's think about it. By 70 AD, Jerusalem got completely wrecked, so no more water drawing or altar pouring. Some folks argue John's Gospel was likely written in the 80s or 90s. By then, the water drawing gig was long gone. So when Jesus starts talking about being thirsty and coming to him for a spiritual drink, it's not just some random chatter, it's tied to these very ancient customs. And we know Jesus loved his object lessons. And here's the thing, if John was just making up what Jesus said, why not give us the full scoop on the ceremony to make it crystal clear? It's not like everyone in his audience would automatically get the reference, especially if they were Gentiles or too young to remember the old days. That's why the way John lays it out feels more like someone jotting down what actually went down, rather than a writer weaving a fancy tale to suit their own agenda. Let's take another example from John. So picture this, it's wintertime in Jerusalem, and Jesus is hanging out during the Feast of Dedication, which is basically Hanukkah. He's chatting with the crowd about being the ultimate shepherd, not letting anyone snatch his sheep away. Then, out of the blue, he drops a bombshell. He says, "I and my Father are one." The folks listening are totally taken aback, to the point where they're ready to hurl stones at him. Critics have a field day with this one, since it's more in your face than anything found in the other Gospels. But here's where John gets super specific about the whole scene. He not only tells us that this heated conversation happened, but he also pinpoints the exact spot. It reads, "It was winter, and Jesus was walking in the temple in the portico of Solomon." Now, Josephus, the history buff, fills us in on this portico. It's this covered walkway on the east side of the temple, supposedly built by good old Solomon himself. It's also a fitting spot for Jesus to drop some truth bombs during the chilly months, giving everyone a bit of a shelter from the winter winds. John, drawing from his memory bank, lays it all out, telling us precisely when and where Jesus was schooling the crowd with his divine wisdom. Alright, so let's dive into John 11 for one last example. So John casually drops in a nugget of information about Bethany being just a stone's throw away from Jerusalem, less than 2 miles. He slips it in there while explaining why there's a crowd of friends gathered to comfort Mary and Martha after their brother Lazarus kicks the bucket. Turns out modern Alexandria, where Bethany is supposed to be, matches up pretty snugly with John's measurement, about 3 kilometers from Jerusalem. Spot on. But don't think for a second that John's dropping this knowledge hoping someone's gonna whip out a measuring tape to fact check him. Nah, he's just narrating the scene like it's no big deal, keeping the story moving along. I hope you're getting a lot out of this series on history and how it lines up with the Gospels. Keep an eye out for more examples in my next videos, and dive into the playlist for even more